7 months pregnant. Standing on a lawn wet with morning dew, Natasha watched her husband's sister hand her a check for $50,000 and tell her she had 1 hour to disappear. Not leave. Disappear. Take the money, pack your things, and understand something very clearly, Judith said, her diamond bracelet catching the first light of dawn. The baby stays with us. You go. Alone. Natasha's hands moved to her belly, protective, disbelieving. Trevor, her husband, the man who'd promised her forever 3 years ago, wouldn't even look at her. Sign the papers, Natasha, he said, his voice flat as concrete. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. It was the morning after Thanksgiving. The house still smelled like turkey and pumpkin pie, and they were erasing her like she'd never existed. But what they did not know about her is what destroyed them. They thought she was just a woman who can be erased easily. What happened next shocked them. Hi, my wonderful friends. Welcome to Mr. William Chronicles, where powerful stories reveal life's deepest truths. Before we continue with Natasha's journey, I want you to help me prove something wrong. Some people claim that this channel won't grow, that people won't listen to these stories. But I believe these stories deserve to be heard. Help me show them that these tales matter. So, do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button right now and join this family of story lovers. It helps me keep bringing you these powerful stories. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is. You are the heartbeat of this channel, and knowing you're out there keeps these stories alive. 24 hours earlier, everything had been different. Thanksgiving dinner at the Hartley family estate in Greenwich. The table stretched long enough to seat 14 people, but Natasha had been placed at the far end, next to Trevor's teenage cousin, who spent the entire meal on his phone. Nothing new. 3 years of marriage, 3 years of being seated at the margins. Judith had made a toast. To family, she'd said, raising her wine glass. Her eyes had skipped right over Natasha. To those who truly belong. Trevor had squeezed Natasha's hand under the table. A silent apology he'd given her 100 times before. She'd believed it meant something then. After dinner, Natasha had gone upstairs to use the bathroom. Pregnancy meant constant trips, and that's when she'd heard them. Judith's voice, sharp and clear through the study door. She was on the phone with someone. The attorney filed everything yesterday. Emergency custody petition. We're citing her instability, her financial dependence, her complete lack of family support. It's airtight. Natasha had frozen in the hallway, one hand on the wall to steady herself. Trevor's on board, Judith continued. He understands now that this was all a terrible mistake. She was a phase, a moment of rebellion. But he's ready to do what's right for the family. The baby had kicked then, as if sensing the danger. Natasha had packed a single bag that night. Not because she was planning to run, but because she needed to be ready for whatever was coming. She hadn't expected it to come at dawn. Now, standing on the lawn with dew soaking through her canvas shoes, Natasha stared at the check in Judith's perfectly manicured hand. This is illegal, Natasha said quietly. You can't take my baby. We're not taking anything, Judith replied, her smile thin and practiced. We're giving you an opportunity to walk away with dignity and some financial security. Most women in your position would be grateful. My position? A woman with no family, no money, no connections. A woman who brought nothing to this marriage except. Judith's eyes flickered down to Natasha's rounded belly. Complications. The word hit like a slap. Natasha turned to Trevor again. He was standing on the porch steps, hands shoved deep in his pockets, looking anywhere but at her face. Tell me she's wrong, Natasha said. Tell me you're not going to let them do this. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, she's not wrong, Natasha. The world tilted. What? Trevor finally met her eyes, and there was nothing in his gaze. No warmth. No recognition. Just cold calculation. You were a mistake, he said, and each word landed with brutal precision. A joyride I took for too long. I have to be realistic now. I need a partner who actually fits into this world. Someone at my level. Someone who understands what it takes to maintain our family standing. Natasha felt something crack inside her chest. Someone white, you mean? Judith's smile tightened. Don't be dramatic. This isn't about race. It's about compatibility, culture, standards. Standards, Natasha repeated, tasting the bitterness of the word. She'd spent 3 years trying to meet their standards. 3 years of etiquette lessons Judith had insisted on. 3 years of criticism about her clothes, her hair, the way she pronounced certain words. 3 years of being the project they thought they could fix. And now, 7 months pregnant, she was being discarded like something broken beyond repair. The papers are on the kitchen counter, Judith said. All business now. Sign them. Take the money. Leave quietly. You'll get supervised visits with the child. Maybe. If you behave. Natasha looked at the house, the colonial mansion with its perfect hedges and fountain and all the weight of old money that had never actually existed the way they pretended it did. She looked at Trevor, this man she loved, this hollow shell of privilege and weakness. She looked at Judith, with her cashmere robe and her cruelty dressed up as kindness. And then Natasha did something that surprised even herself. She laughed. Not a bitter laugh. Not a hysterical one. Just a short, sharp sound of pure disbelief. You really have no idea, she said softly. Judith's eyes narrowed. No idea about what? But Natasha was already walking toward the house. She went inside, grabbed the single duffel bag she'd packed, and came back out. She walked past Judith without taking the check. The offer expires in 1 hour, Judith called after her. Natasha kept walking. She got into her Honda Civic, the car Judith had always wrinkled her nose at, the car that had been a deliberate choice, part of a carefully constructed life that was nothing like the truth. Trevor took a step forward, suddenly uncertain. Natasha, wait. She didn't wait. She drove. Past the gates. Past the manicured lawns of Greenwich. Past the country clubs and the carefully preserved illusion of wealth that the Hartley family clung to like a life raft. She drove for 20 minutes before she pulled over at a rest stop, hands shaking on the steering wheel. The baby kicked again. Strong. Insistent. I know, Natasha whispered, her hand on her belly. I know, sweetheart. We're going to be okay. But underneath the shock, underneath the betrayal and the raw ache of being thrown away like garbage, something else was building. Fury. Cold. Clear. Crystalline. Because the Hartleys had made one catastrophic mistake. They thought they knew who she was. They had no idea. Natasha pulled out her phone. The screen displayed a contact she hadn't called in 3 years. A number she'd promised herself she wouldn't use unless she absolutely had to. Her finger hovered over the name. Dad. She pressed call. 2 rings. Then his voice, warm and familiar and laced with immediate concern. Tasha. She closed her eyes. Daddy. I need you. A pause. Then, with the quiet certainty of a man who'd built empires from nothing. Where are you? Connecticut. Her voice cracked. They threw me out. They're trying to take the baby. Silence. The dangerous kind. When Raymond Blackwell spoke again, his voice was calm. Too calm. Who is they? Trevor. His family. They think. She couldn't finish. What do you need? Her father asked. Not what happened. Not how could they. Just the only question that mattered. What do you need? Natasha opened her eyes. Through the windshield, she could see the highway stretching ahead. Behind her, Greenwich. The Hartleys. The life she tried so hard to build on her own terms. They'd called her a mistake. A phase. They'd measured her worth in dollar signs and found her lacking. I need them to understand who I am, Natasha said quietly. I need them to know exactly what they just did. Her father's response was immediate. Consider it done. When Natasha hung up, she wasn't crying anymore. She was planning. The Hartley family had spent 3 years treating her like she was beneath them. They were about to learn what it felt like when the ground disappeared completely. What the Hartleys didn't know, what nobody in Greenwich knew, was that the woman they'd just thrown out wasn't some struggling non-profit worker from nowhere. Natasha Blackwell was the only child of Raymond Blackwell, the man who controlled a private equity empire worth $4.2 billion. Her father owned pharmaceutical companies, real estate across 3 continents, media outlets, His firm had senators on speed dial and could move markets with a single press release. And for 3 years, Natasha had hidden it all. It started when she was 24, sitting in her father's office in Manhattan, watching him close a deal that would put 1,200 people out of work. "It's just business, Tasha," he'd said, signing the papers without hesitation. She'd looked at him, this man she loved, this titan who'd given her everything, and realized she had no idea who she was outside of being his daughter. Everyone in her life wanted something. The college friends who suddenly appeared when she mentioned her last name. The boyfriends who stayed just long enough to make connections. The charity boards that put her name on their letterhead before she'd even attended a meeting. She was a brand, a transaction, a door that opened to her father's world. So she'd walked away, changed her name to her mother's maiden name, Keene, moved to a modest apartment in Hartford, took a job at a small nonprofit focused on education access, making $38,000 a year. Her father had been furious, then heartbroken, then finally resigned. "You want to know who you are without the money," he'd said. "Fine. But when you figure it out, come home." She'd lasted 2 years before she met Trevor. He'd been charming, attentive. He'd pursued her with flowers and handwritten notes and weekend trips to Cape Cod. He'd proposed at sunset on a beach, and when she'd said yes, she'd believed she was marrying someone who loved her for herself. Not her father's fortune, not the trust fund she'd never mentioned, just her. The wedding had been small. Trevor's family had seemed puzzled by the lack of her relatives. She'd told them her parents were dead, killed in a car accident years ago. A lie that tasted like acid, but necessary. She'd wanted to prove she could build a life that mattered without her father's shadow. She'd wanted to be enough on her own. For 3 years, she'd been Natasha Keene, the charity worker. The woman with the aging Honda and the thrift store clothes and the quiet determination to make a difference in small, unsexy ways. Trevor's family had tolerated her, barely. And now, driving away from Greenwich with her father's voice still warm in her ear, Natasha realized the terrible irony. She'd spent 3 years trying to be seen for who she really was. And the moment they'd thrown her away was the moment they'd learned the truth. By the time Natasha reached her father's estate in Martha's Vineyard, night had fallen. The house rose from the cliffs like something out of a dream, all glass and stone and breathtaking views of the Atlantic. She'd grown up here, summers on the beach, winters by the fireplace. A childhood wrapped in comfort she'd taken for granted until she'd walked away from it. Raymond was waiting at the door. He was 62 but looked 50. With silver hair and the kind of presence that made boardrooms go silent. When he saw Natasha, pregnant, exhausted, eyes red from crying she'd finally allowed herself on the drive, his face crumpled. "My girl," he said, pulling her into his arms. She broke then, completely. "I'm sorry," she sobbed into his chest. "I'm so sorry I stayed away so long." "Shoo, you're home now. That's all that matters." He led her inside. The housekeeper, Maria, had prepared her old room. The bed was turned down. Tea was waiting on the nightstand. But Natasha couldn't sleep. She sat with her father in his study, the fire crackling, and told him everything. The 3 years of subtle cruelty. The comments about her clothes, her background, her worth. The way Judith had made her feel like a charity case at every family gathering. The way Trevor had slowly pulled away, embarrassed by her in front of his colleagues. And finally, this morning, the check, the custody threat, the word that had cut deepest, mistake. Raymond listened without interrupting. When she finished, he stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "Do you know what they're worth?" he asked quietly. "Trevor's family?" "Yes." Natasha shook her head. "They act like they have old money. The estate, the lifestyle. They're mortgaged to the ceiling," Raymond said. "The house has a lien. The business is hemorrhaging clients. They're surviving on credit and reputation, and both are running thin." He turned to face her. "They're not your equals, Tasha. They never were. And they sure as hell aren't your superiors. I know that now. Do you?" His eyes were sharp. "Because you hid who you were for 3 years. You made yourself small for people who should have been grateful you even looked their way. The words stung because they were true. I wanted to be loved for me, Natasha said softly. Not for your money. And were you? She thought of Trevor's face this morning. The coldness. The calculation. No. Raymond crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair, something she'd never seen him do. This man who commanded rooms full of CEOs. Then let me ask you something, sweetheart. What do you want me to do? Natasha met her father's eyes. She saw concern there. Love. And underneath it all, the barely leashed fury of a man who just watched his pregnant daughter get thrown away like trash. I want them to know who I am, she said. I want them to understand what they did. And I want them to live with it. Raymond nodded slowly. Not revenge. Justice. Is there a difference? Yes. Revenge is emotional. Justice is precise. He stood. I'll make some calls in the morning. Quietly. Carefully. They'll never see it coming. What are you going to do? Her father's smile was thin. I'm going to show them what real power looks like. And then I'm going to let them live in the ruins of what they built on arrogance and borrowed money. He kissed her forehead. Get some rest. You're safe now. You and my grandchild both. But Natasha couldn't rest. She lay in bed, one hand on her belly, staring at the ceiling. The baby was moving, restless, as if sensing the storm that was coming. Trevor thought he'd married beneath himself. Judith thought she'd done Natasha a favor by offering $50,000 and a way out. They'd measured her worth and found her lacking. Tomorrow, the world would shift beneath their feet. And they'd spend the rest of their lives knowing they'd had everything. A connection to real wealth, real power, real opportunity. And they'd thrown it away because they couldn't see past their own prejudice. Natasha closed her eyes. She'd spent 3 years being someone she wasn't, trying to earn love from people who'd never intended to give it. That ended today. Tomorrow, Natasha Keene disappeared forever. And Natasha Blackwell, daughter of Raymond Blackwell, heiress to billions, the woman Trevor and Judith had called a mistake, would show them exactly what they'd lost. The Hartleys wanted her gone? Fine. But they'd remember her for the rest of their lives. In 3 days, the first domino would fall. And once it started, nothing would stop the collapse. For days after Thanksgiving, Trevor's phone rang at 7 in the morning. It was David Chun, CEO of Meridian Pharmaceuticals, his biggest client, responsible for 40% of Hartley and Associates' annual revenue. Trevor, I'm calling as a courtesy, Chun said, his tone apologetic but firm. We're pulling our account. Trevor sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. What? David, if this is about the quarterly report, I can explain. It's not about the report. The board made a decision. We're consolidating all our financial advisory work with another firm. Which firm? A pause. Blackwell Apex Group. The name meant nothing to Trevor. I've never heard of them. You should have. Chen's voice carried a strange weight. They're very influential. This came from the top, Trevor. I'm sorry. The line went dead. Trevor stared at his phone, confused. One client leaving wasn't catastrophic, but Meridian had been their anchor. Without them, the firm would struggle to make payroll next quarter. He called his attorney. Look into a company called Blackwell Apex Group, Trevor said. Find out who they are and why they're poaching my clients. I'll get back to you, the attorney promised. Trevor didn't have time to worry. He had 3 client meetings scheduled, a presentation to finalize, and now a massive hole in his revenue stream to plug. But by noon, 2 more clients had called. Same story. Same apologetic tones. Same company name. Blackwell Apex Group. By the time Trevor got to the office, Judith was waiting in the conference room, her face tight with barely controlled panic. The country club called. She said, without preamble, our membership's been terminated. Effective immediately. Trevor blinked. What? That's impossible. Our family's been members for 40 years. That's what I said. They told me the board voted unanimously. When I asked to speak to the president, they said he was unavailable. Unavailable or avoiding you? Judith's jaw clenched. They wouldn't say. Trevor sank into a chair. This doesn't make sense. First Meridian, now the club. What about Meridian? He told her. watched the color drain from his sister's face as the implications settled in. "Trevor, what's happening?" "I don't know." But somewhere in his gut, a cold dread was beginning to form. That afternoon, the building manager called. "Mr. Hartley, I wanted to give you advance notice. The property's been sold. New ownership is declining to renew your lease." Trevor gripped the phone. "Our lease doesn't expire for 18 months. There's a clause allowing termination with 90 days notice if ownership changes hands. The new owners are exercising that option." "I'm sorry." "Who bought the building?" "A private equity consortium. They're planning renovations." Trevor hung up and immediately Googled the consortium's name. It took him 3 clicks to find a parent company, Blackwell Apex Group. His hands started shaking. That evening, his attorney called back. "Trevor, we need to meet. In person." "Just tell me over the phone." "No. You need to see this." An hour later, Trevor sat in his attorney's office while a folder was placed in front of him. "Blackwell Apex Group is owned by Raymond Blackwell," the attorney said carefully. "He's worth over $4 billion. Private equity, pharmaceuticals, real estate, media. He's one of the most powerful men in American finance." Trevor's throat went dry. Why would someone like that target me? The attorney hesitated. Then he pulled out another document. A photograph. It showed a younger woman at a charity gala, wearing an elegant gown, standing beside an older man in a tuxedo. The caption read, "Raymond Blackwell and daughter Natasha at the Metropolitan Museum fundraiser." Trevor's vision tunneled. "No," he whispered. The attorney pulled out more photos. Society pages. Forbes profiles. Images of Natasha, his Natasha, at hospital wing openings, economic summits, auction houses. Always beside her father. Natasha Blackwell, the attorney said quietly. Raymond's only child. She disappeared from public life 3 years ago. Apparently, she wanted to make it on her own, away from her father's wealth. Trevor couldn't breathe. "The woman you married," the attorney continued, "is an heiress worth billions. And from what I'm seeing, her father doesn't take kindly to people who hurt her." The folder hit the desk as Trevor's hands went numb. "Oh God," he said. "Oh God, what did I do?" "What did you do, Trevor?" He couldn't answer, couldn't form the words. "I threw her out. I called her a mistake. I tried to take her baby." The attorney leaned forward. "There's more. Your family trusts, the ones your grandfather established, they're being audited." Suddenly, simultaneously, the IRS received anonymous tips about irregularities. "We don't have irregularities." "Doesn't matter. The audit process alone will freeze your assets for months. And the legal fees." Trevor stood abruptly, knocking his chair back. "I need to talk to Judith." But Judith was discovering the truth herself, in a far more public way. She was at a charity luncheon, one of the last social events she'd been invited to before word spread about the family's financial troubles, when her oldest friend, Patricia Morrison, approached with a gleam in her eye. "Judith, darling, I have to tell you something about that girl Trevor married." Judith barely looked up from her salad. "What about her?" Patricia leaned in, voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Do you know who her father is?" She said her parents were dead. She lied. Her father is Raymond Blackwell, the billionaire. I saw her at the Met Gala 4 years ago. She was on the Young Patrons Committee. She's been an heiress this entire time, Judith. An heiress. Judith's fork clattered to her plate. "That's impossible. She worked at a nonprofit. She drove a Honda. Apparently, she wanted to make it on her own. Admirable, really." Patricia's smile sharpened. "But I've heard Raymond Blackwell doesn't forgive people who mistreat his daughter. The Morrison family, no relation to me, different Morrisons. They made some comments about her at a yacht club event last year. Their hedge fund collapsed in 72 hours. Judith's face went white. "You're saying she's behind what's happening to us?" "I'm saying you kicked out a billionaire's pregnant daughter on Thanksgiving morning. And now you're surprised there are consequences." Patricia sipped her wine, enjoying every second of Judith's horror. "If I were you," she added, "I'd start looking for a job. A real one. Because, from what I'm hearing, the Hartley name won't open doors anymore. It'll close them." That night, Trevor and Judith sat in the study of their family estate. The estate they just learned was about to be seized for unpaid property taxes that had somehow been reassessed and compounded. "We destroyed ourselves," Trevor said, his voice hollow. "We had everything, a connection to billions, and we threw it away." Judith's hands trembled around her wine glass. She hid who she was. How were we supposed to know? We weren't supposed to treat her like garbage, regardless of who her father was. The silence that followed was suffocating. "What do we do?" Judith finally asked. Trevor looked at his sister, this woman who'd orchestrated the whole thing, who'd convinced him that Natasha was beneath them, that the baby would be better off without her. "We survive," he said bitterly. "If she lets us." The calls kept coming over the next 2 weeks. Clients leaving, credit lines being called in, business partners backing out of deals. Every financial pillar that held up Hartley and Associates crumbled, one after another. And every time Trevor dug into who was behind it, the same name appeared: Blackwell Apex Group. By week 3, the firm declared bankruptcy. Trevor had to let go of his staff, people who'd worked for his family for decades. Judith sold her jewelry, then her car, then accepted a job offer that made her physically ill: administrative assistant at a mid-sized law firm. $45,000 a year, health insurance, 2 weeks vacation. Her first job ever. Trevor ended up in a cramped apartment in Stamford, working as a junior analyst at a firm where nobody knew his last name meant anything. The estate sold at auction. The furniture, the art, the crystal, everything scattered to strangers. Everything they'd had, everything they'd been, gone. And through it all, one thought haunted Trevor. She never needed us. We needed her, and we were too blind to see it. 6 weeks after Thanksgiving, Trevor woke up in his Stamford apartment to the sound of rain against cheap windows. The place was a shoebox. 1 bedroom. A kitchen barely big enough to turn around in. Walls so thin he could hear his neighbor's television through the drywall. He'd grown up in a house with 12 rooms. Now he lived in 400 square feet of someone else's failure. He got ready for work in silence. The junior analyst position paid enough to cover rent and groceries, but not much else. His coworkers were fresh college graduates who treated him like he was one of them, unaware that 6 months ago he'd been running a multi-million-dollar firm. The commute was 40 minutes on a train that smelled like wet clothes and disappointment. This was his life now. And every single day he thought about Natasha, the way she'd looked that morning on the lawn, 7 months pregnant, shaking, searching his face for any sign that he'd protect her. And he'd called her a mistake. Meanwhile, Judith was discovering her own version of hell. The law firm where she worked was busy, impersonal, and utterly indifferent to her existence. She answered phones, filed documents, scheduled depositions for attorneys who barely acknowledged her presence. On her 3rd week, one of the senior partners walked past her desk and stopped. "Judith Hartley," he said, squinting at her nameplate. She looked up, hopeful. Maybe he knew her family. Maybe this was a chance to. Any relation to the Hartleys who lost everything last month? Her throat closed. "Ah, yes. That's my family." He nodded slowly. "Tough break. But hey, everyone's got to start somewhere, right?" He walked away. That was the moment Judith understood. Nobody cared who she used to be. In this world, she was just another assistant making copies and fetching coffee. The old Judith would have quit on the spot. But the old Judith had money, a safety net, options. This Judith had rent due in 8 days and $17 in her checking account. So she swallowed her pride, picked up the phone, and kept working. That evening, Trevor received an email. The sender line made his stomach drop, and Blackwell. He stared at the screen for a full minute before opening it. The message was short, precise, devastating. "Trevor, by now you understand who I am, who I've always been. You spent 3 years making me feel worthless. Your sister spent 3 years treating me like a project you could fix, and then discard when I didn't meet her standards. You thought you were doing me a favor by letting me into your world. You were never above me, Trevor. I was always above you. I just loved you enough to pretend I wasn't. When I needed you most, pregnant, scared, desperate, you called me a mistake. You said I wasn't at your level, that you needed a partner who understood what it takes to maintain your family standing. So I showed you what standing actually looks like. The divorce is finalized. Full custody is mine. You'll get supervised visits if you can prove you're capable of being a father worth knowing. That's more than you gave me. I've left you enough to survive, not to thrive, that you'll have to earn. But you won't starve. You won't be homeless. Because, unlike you, I don't kick people when they're vulnerable and pregnant. Don't contact me again. But know this, I'm Natasha Blackwell. I've always been Natasha Blackwell. And everyone in Connecticut knows now exactly who I am, and what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. N. P.S. Your sister's rent is paid through the end of the year. Not because she deserves it, but because I won't have her homelessness on my conscience. She can hate me all she wants, but she'll do it from a warm apartment with food in her fridge. That's the difference between her and me. Trevor read the email 3 times. Then he put his head in his hands and wept. Not because of the money he'd lost. Not because of the business or the estate or the reputation. But because he'd had something real. Someone who'd loved him without needing anything from him. And he destroyed it with his own hands. Judith got the same message, with one additional line at the end. You taught me that some people measure worth by bloodlines and bank accounts. I hope it was worth it. She deleted the email immediately. Then she opened it from the trash and read it again. And again. The words burned themselves into her memory. I was always above you. It was true. Objectively, undeniably true. And Judith had been too arrogant to see it. That weekend, Judith tried to sell her story to a tabloid. Billionaire heiress destroys family for revenge. The pitch went. Innocent woman forced into poverty by vindictive ex-sister-in-law. The reporter listened politely, took notes, and promised to get back to her. 3 days later, the call came. We're passing on the story, the reporter said. Why? Because we did our research, Ms. Hartley. The custody petition you filed? The coercion? The recorded conversation where you called her baby a complication? That's all public record now. Judith's blood ran cold. How? Your ex-sister-in-law's attorneys made sure of it. So unless you want us to run a story about how you tried to steal a pregnant woman's child, I'd suggest you drop this. The line went dead. Judith sat in her tiny apartment, the one Natasha was paying for, and realized something terrible. There was no escaping this. No rewriting the narrative. No redemption arc where she came out looking sympathetic. She'd done something unforgivable, and the evidence was everywhere. Trevor had his own breaking point 2 months later. He was at a coffee shop near his office when he overheard 2 women talking at the next table. Did you see the article about Natasha Blackwell? One said. Trevor froze. The billionaire's daughter who went undercover for 3 years? It's incredible. She worked at a nonprofit, lived modestly, got married, and her husband's family had no idea who she was. What happened? They kicked her out when she was pregnant, tried to take her baby. Then she revealed who her father was and destroyed them financially. Good for her, right? Some people need to learn the hard way that you don't judge someone by their car or their job. That woman had more class in her pinky than that whole family combined. Trevor stood abruptly, knocking his chair back, and walked out. He made it half a block before he had to stop, leaning against a building, gasping for air. Everyone knew. The whole story. The cruelty. The prejudice. The stupidity. And everyone agreed. Natasha was the hero. He was the villain. That night, lying in his cramped apartment, Trevor thought about calling her, begging for forgiveness, asking for a chance to see his daughter, promising he'd be better. But the email had been clear. Don't contact me again. So he didn't. He just lay there in the dark, listening to the rain, and thought about the morning on the lawn. The moment everything changed. The moment he'd chosen his sister's approval over his wife's dignity. The moment he'd thrown away the best thing that had ever happened to him because he'd been too cowardly to stand up for what mattered. Judith had her own moment of clarity the same night. She was scrolling through old photos on her phone, pictures from holidays, family gatherings, the wedding. In every single photo with Natasha, Judith was smiling that tight, fake smile. The smile that said, "You don't belong here." And in every photo, Natasha was trying so hard. Trying to fit in. Trying to be enough. Trying to earn acceptance from people who decided from day one that she never would. Judith deleted the photos. All of them. Because she couldn't stand to look at her own face anymore. If you're still watching and feeling that satisfaction right now, tap that like button. You know Natasha deserved this moment. Show this story some love with a like, and comment, "I see you, Natasha," if you're rooting for her. 6 weeks later, Trevor's attorney called with news. Natasha's legal team reached out. She's willing to allow supervised visitation. Once a month, 2 hours, at a neutral location with a social worker present. Trevor's hands shook. She is. On one condition, you complete a parenting course and prove you're stable. Employed. Sober. No games, no manipulation, no attempts to relitigate custody. I'll do it. Anything. Trevor, let me be clear. This is a gift. Don't waste it. When the call ended, Trevor sat in silence. Once a month wasn't enough. But it was more than he deserved. And maybe, if he did the work, if he proved himself, it could be more someday. Judith got no such offer. And deep down, she knew she never would. 8 months after Thanksgiving, Trevor stood in a supervised visitation center in Hartford, waiting to meet his daughter for the first time. The room was painted a cheerful yellow that felt like a lie. Plastic toys scattered across the floor. A social worker named Angela sat in the corner with a clipboard, watching everything. The door opened. Natasha walked in carrying a baby. Trevor's breath caught. She looked different. Stronger. Her hair was pulled back, no makeup, wearing jeans and a simple sweater. But there was something in her posture, a certainty that hadn't been there before. And in her arms, wrapped in a soft pink blanket, was his daughter. "Trevor," Natasha said quietly. "Natasha." His voice cracked. "Thank you for this. I know I don't deserve." "You're right. You don't." She sat down, adjusting the baby in her arms. "But she deserves a chance to know her father. If you can be one." Trevor moved closer, his eyes locked on the tiny face peeking out from the blanket. "What's her name?" "Grace." "Grace," he repeated, and something in his chest shattered. Can I hold her?" Natasha hesitated. Then, carefully, she stood and placed Grace in his arms. The baby was warm and solid and impossibly small. She had Natasha's eyes, dark and deep, and already seeing more than he wanted her to. Trevor felt tears sliding down his face. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. Not to Natasha, to Grace. "I'm so sorry I wasn't there. I'm sorry I failed before you were even born." Grace yawned, unimpressed by his apologies. Natasha watched from across the room, her expression unreadable. "You have 90 minutes, she said. "Angela will be here the whole time. There's a bottle in the bag if she gets hungry. Don't try to take her outside. Don't take any photos without asking me first." "I won't." "And Trevor." Natasha's voice went hard. "If you ever try to use her as leverage or manipulate this arrangement or go back to being the person you were that morning, I will make sure you never see her again. Understood?" He nodded, unable to speak. Natasha left without another word. For the next hour and a half, Trevor sat on the floor of that yellow room, holding his daughter, talking to her in a soft voice about nothing and everything. He told her about his mistakes, his regrets, the person he wanted to be for her. Grace mostly slept, but it was enough. When Natasha returned to pick Grace up, Trevor handed her back carefully, as if she were made of glass. "Next month," he asked, "if you keep showing up, if you do the work, I will. I promise." Natasha studied him for a long moment. "Promises don't mean much from you, Trevor, but actions might." She left, and Trevor sat in that empty room, surrounded by plastic toys and cheerful yellow walls, and realized something important. He'd lost Natasha forever. But maybe, he could still be a father Grace wouldn't be ashamed of someday. That same week, Judith made her own attempt at contact. She sent a letter to Natasha's attorney. 5 pages, handwritten, explaining everything she'd felt, everything she believed, everything she regretted. The response came 3 days later. A single line from Natasha's legal team. Ms. Blackwell has no interest in communication with Judith Hartley at this time or in the foreseeable future. Please do not contact this office again on Ms. Hartley's behalf. Judith read the line over and over until the words blurred. She'd expected it. But expecting rejection didn't make it hurt less. She tried one more time, weeks later, showing up at the nonprofit where Natasha had worked years ago. The director, a kind woman named Sharon, met her in the lobby. "I'm looking for Natasha," Judith said. "Natasha Keene. She used to work here." Sharon's expression shifted. "Natasha doesn't work here anymore. And even if she did, I don't think she'd want to see you, Ms. Hartley." "How do you?" "Everyone knows the story. It was in the papers. Online. You really think people wouldn't recognize you?" Judith's face burned. "I just want to apologize. Then write it down and give it to her lawyers. But don't come here expecting redemption. That's not how this works." Sharon walked away, leaving Judith standing alone in a lobby that suddenly felt like a courtroom. She left and never came back. 3 months later, Trevor completed his parenting course. He brought the certificate to his next visitation with Grace, hands shaking as he showed it to Natasha. "I finished," he said. "All 12 weeks. Perfect attendance." Natasha glanced at the paper. "Good. Keep going. There's an advanced course that starts next month. I want you enrolled." "I will." "And you're still employed?" "Yes. Same job. I'm up for a promotion, actually." She nodded, her face giving nothing away. "How's Judith?" The question caught him off guard. "I don't know. We don't really talk anymore." "Why not?" Trevor looked down at Grace, who was babbling happily in his lap. "Because every time I see her, I remember what we did. And I can't look at her without seeing that morning." Natasha was quiet for a moment. "She's still my sister," Trevor added. "But I don't know if I can forgive her. Or myself." "Good," Natasha said simply. He looked up, startled. "Good. You shouldn't forgive yourself easily. What you did deserves to haunt you." Her eyes were steady, unflinching. "But maybe in 10 years, if you've actually changed, if you've been a good father, if you've done the work, maybe then you'll have earned the right to let it go." Trevor swallowed hard. "And you? Will you ever forgive me?" Natasha stood, gathering Grace's things. "I don't need to forgive you, Trevor. I've moved on. You're just someone I used to know who gets to see our daughter once a month because I believe in second chances, for her sake, not yours." She took Grace from his arms. "But here's what I want you to understand. I didn't destroy your family because I'm cruel. I did it because you needed to learn that actions have consequences, that you can't treat people like they're disposable and expect the universe to look the other way. I know that now. Do you? Or do you just know it because you lost something?" Trevor had no answer. Natasha adjusted Grace on her hip. "There's a difference between regret and growth, Trevor. Regret is wishing you hadn't gotten caught. Growth is becoming someone who wouldn't do it in the first place. I'm trying to grow. Then keep trying. For her." Natasha kissed Grace's forehead. "Not for me. Not for yourself. For this little girl who deserves better than the father you were." She walked toward the door, then paused. "One more thing. I saw Judith's letter, the one she sent through my lawyers." Trevor tensed. And nothing. She wanted absolution. "I'm not a priest." She made her choices. Now she lives with them. She's working 2 jobs now, barely making rent. "I know. I'm still paying half of it." Trevor stared. "You are." "Like I said in my email, I won't have her homelessness on my conscience. But charity isn't forgiveness. It's just proof that I'm not the person she thought I was." Natasha opened the door. "See you next month, Trevor. Don't be late." The door closed behind her. Trevor sat alone in the yellow room, Angela the social worker already packing up her things, and felt the full weight of everything he'd lost. Not just the money or the business or the house, but the woman who'd loved him when he was nobody. The woman who'd hidden her billions because she wanted to be loved for herself. The woman he'd thrown away because he'd been too weak to see what mattered. Outside, Natasha buckled Grace into the car seat and drove toward her father's estate. Her phone buzzed. A text from Raymond. "How did it go?" She typed back, "He's trying. We'll see if it lasts." "And you? How are you holding up?" Natasha glanced in the rearview mirror at Grace, who was already falling asleep. "I'm okay, Dad. Better than okay. I'm free." And she was. Free from the weight of trying to be someone she wasn't. Free from the need to earn love from people who'd never planned to give it. Free from the girl who'd stood on a lawn 7 months pregnant, listening to her worth be measured and found lacking. That girl was gone. In her place was Natasha Blackwell, mother, heiress, survivor. And she would never apologize for taking up space in the world again. 1 year after Thanksgiving, Natasha sat in her father's study with Grace asleep in her arms. The baby was almost 4 months old now, with chubby cheeks and her mother's determined chin. She'd just learned to grab things, mostly Natasha's hair and her grandfather's reading glasses. Raymond walked in carrying 2 cups of coffee, setting one down beside her. "Trevor's attorney called," he said carefully. Natasha looked up. "What did he want?" "Trevor's asking if he can increase visitation. He's completed both parenting courses. He's been promoted at work. He wants to go from monthly to twice a month." Natasha was quiet, studying Grace's sleeping face. "What do you think?" Raymond asked. "I think he's doing what he should have done from the beginning. Being consistent. Showing up. Proving himself." "That's not what I asked." Natasha met her father's eyes. "I think Grace deserves a father who's present. If he can be that person, then yes. Twice a month. Still supervised for now." Raymond nodded. "I'll have the attorneys draw up the modification." He sat down across from her, cradling his coffee. "And Judith? What about her? She's been trying to contact you again, through different channels. She sent flowers to the foundation last week." Natasha's jaw tightened. "Tell security to refuse any further deliveries from her." "You're not interested in hearing what she has to say?" "No. Not even eventually?" Natasha shifted Grace to her shoulder. "Dad, Trevor gets second chances because he's Grace's father. That's the only reason. Judith? She orchestrated everything. She was the one who filed the custody petition. She was the one who coached Trevor on what to say. She was the one who handed me that check and told me to disappear. And she's paying for it." "Good." Raymond studied his daughter. "You know, when you first called me that morning, I wanted to destroy them completely. Bankrupt them. Ruin them so thoroughly they'd never recover. Why didn't you?" "Because you asked me for justice, not revenge. You said you wanted them to live with what they'd done." He smiled slightly. "You were right. This is worse than anything I could have done financially." Natasha looked down at Grace. She has to wake up every single day knowing she had a relationship with her niece, with this perfect little girl, and she threw it away because she couldn't see past her own prejudice. That's the punishment that fits. Do you think she's changed? I don't care if she's changed. Some doors close, Dad. And they don't open again just because someone finally realizes what they lost. Raymond raised his coffee cup in a small salute. My daughter. Compassionate but not stupid. I learned from the best. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the only sound Grace's soft breathing and the distant crash of waves against the cliffs. I've been thinking about something, Natasha said quietly. What's that? Before I met Trevor, when I walked away from everything, I was so sure I needed to prove I could make it on my own, that being your daughter was holding me back from being myself. And now I realize I was always myself. The money didn't change that. The name didn't change that. I just needed to learn that my worth isn't tied to what other people think of me. Raymond's eyes were bright. That's the lesson, sweetheart. The one I couldn't teach you. You had to learn it yourself. It was an expensive lesson. The best ones usually are. Natasha kissed Grace's head. But I wouldn't change it. Any of it. Because if I hadn't gone through that, I wouldn't have her. And she's worth every terrible moment. What about Trevor? Do you regret marrying him? Natasha considered this. I regret who he turned out to be. But I don't regret believing people could be better than they are. That's not naivety. That's hope. And I refuse to let what happened turn me cynical. Good. Because the world needs more people like you. People who've been broken and still choose kindness. Kindness isn't weakness, Dad. That's what they never understood. Raymond stood, kissing the top of her head. I'm proud of you. For leaving when you needed to find yourself. For coming back when you needed us. And for knowing the difference between the two. After he left, Natasha sat alone with Grace, watching the afternoon light shift across the water. Her phone buzzed. A notification from a news alert. Hartley and Associates officially dissolved. Trevor Hartley accepts position as senior analyst at Mercer Financial Group. She read it twice, then deleted it. Trevor's life was no longer her concern. What mattered was the weight of her daughter in her arms. The sound of the ocean. The knowledge that she would raise Grace to be fierce and certain and unafraid to take up space in the world. Another notification appeared. This one from her lawyer. Judith Hartley attempted to contact you again via the Foundation's public email. Email blocked. Should we pursue a cease and desist? Natasha typed back, no. Let her send emails into the void if it makes her feel better. Just keep blocking them. She set the phone down and looked at Grace, who was starting to wake up, blinking those serious dark eyes. You want to know something, baby girl? Natasha whispered. The world's going to tell you all kinds of things about who you should be, what you should want, how you should act to make other people comfortable. Grace yawned. And some people are going to look at you and make assumptions about your worth, your intelligence, your place in their world. They're going to try to make you smaller so they can feel bigger. She stood, walking to the window with Grace in her arms. But here's what I need you to remember. You are Natasha Grace Blackwell. You are my daughter, Raymond Blackwell's granddaughter. You come from strength and survival, and people who built empires from nothing. The baby grabbed a fistful of Natasha's hair. More importantly, you come from love. Real love. Not the conditional kind that disappears when things get hard, but the kind that shows up, that fights, that protects. Natasha's reflection stared back at her from the window. A woman who'd been broken and put herself back together stronger. So when people underestimate you, and they will, you smile. You let them think whatever they want, and then you show them exactly who you are. Grace made a soft cooing sound. Your father is learning that lesson now. He's trying to be better. And if he succeeds, you'll have a relationship with him. A real one, built on consistency and effort, not DNA and obligation. She bounced Grace gently. But you'll always know this, I fought for you. Before you were even born. When the whole world tried to take you away from me, I fought. And I won. The sun was setting now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. And one day, when you're old enough to understand, I'll tell you this story. About the Thanksgiving when everything changed. About the people who thought they were throwing away garbage and didn't realize they were losing a queen. Natasha turned away from the window, her voice firm. I'll tell you how I learned that real power isn't about money. It's about knowing who you are so completely that nobody can make you forget it. Not even the people who claim to love you. She sat back down in the leather chair, Grace settling against her chest. Your grandfather says some people are underestimated their entire lives. The smart ones stay patient, document everything, and wait for the perfect moment to show the world who they've always been. Grace's eyes were closing again, her small hand wrapped around Natasha's finger. I was one of the smart ones, baby. And I'm going to make sure you are too. Outside, the first stars appeared. Another Thanksgiving approaching. Another year of Grace's life beginning. But this time, Natasha was exactly where she belonged. In her father's home, with her daughter in her arms, and with absolute certainty that she would never let anyone make her feel small again. The Hartleys learned the hard way. When you throw away a queen and treat her like trash, don't be surprised when she comes back wearing her crown and burns your kingdom down. Not with cruelty, not with revenge, but with the simple, devastating truth of who she'd always been. And Connecticut would never forget it. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like. It really helps the channel grow. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from and your favorite moment in the story. And subscribe to Mr. William Chronicles so you don't miss stories like this. We tell stories about people who turned their pain into power. And trust me, there are more coming. See you in the next one.